Today's a little bit different of a video than normal. I got a comment on my Facebook group, and the comment basically said, "So, how do you actually work with people?" It was an anonymous comment, and there's a little form on the Facebook group where you can submit anonymous questions, comments to me. And so I got this. How do you work with people? And that was it. So I'm gonna use my own interpretation on how to answer that. If you've been following this channel or this podcast, you know that about half the time I just come up with topics on my own, but about another half the time the topics are coming from questions that clients ask me, questions that are emailed, or just comments on a video or something like that. And this is one of the latter where I'm getting a comment, although it's not super specific, but I had just happened to have a client, they binged, and they're working with me, right? So you might wonder, like, well, don't you help people stop binge eating? And then if the client binge eats, isn't that an indication of failure? And the answer is hell no. Hell no. This is not stop on a dime binge eat. We look at patterns, and we study the patterns, and we have a growth mindset, and we see how we can change the pattern. And I liked the email I wrote her. So I'm going to try to keep I'm going to read the email. That's what I'm going to do. So she binged. Not going to go into details. We're just going to keep it, anonymous and all that stuff. But I'll read my response, and then I'll kind of comment on my response and why I'm saying certain things. So anyways, let's get into it. So I said, thank you, prayer sign. I read it all, from the struggle at work to leaving your phone at work, to the peanut butter, to thoughts that you can't do it, that it's all your fault, and to the sadness, the deep sadness. So this comes from a journal entry she had shared with me where I asked her, she said she binged, and I asked her to apply the growth mindset. What happened? What thoughts and feelings were happening, and what led up to the event? This is really key, applying the growth mindset to binge eating experiences so we can learn from them. They're trying to teach you something if you listen. If you don't judge yourself, and if you're curious and you ask questions, then we can learn and move past it. So I said, thank you for having the courage to pray and to share with me. I feel the depth of your feelings. This is courageous work you're doing. You're on the right path. You did a great job of describing what happened and the events leading up to the binge. I can totally see the pattern of stress and overwhelm, and I'm sure you can too. But now let's go one step further. Let's see what we can learn from this binge episode. How can you adopt a growth mindset? What could you do differently next time? And I bolded, what could you do differently next time? She had described in a lot of detail what had happened and the events leading up to the binge, but she hadn't quite taken that next step and thought about what she could do differently next time. This is one of the most important steps, and it's a little bit difficult because a binge could you feel out of control. It's like if you're driving on the road and then someone just blindsides you, just hits you out of control. It's like, what could you do differently, right? You're driving nice and safe and someone just blindsides you. Like, what could you do differently next time? It's out of your control. But that's what we want to look at. We want to look at what did you have under your control? The binge is out of your control, but the events leading up to the binge are under your control. In particular, forms of self-care. Were you able to feel what you needed in that moment? That's one. Were you able to make sense of the feelings? Two, if you're feeling sometimes you feel a deep sadness and it's pretty obvious. Okay, I need to take care of the sadness. But more oftentimes it's like a swirl. It's just this crazy swirl, and you don't know how to make sense of it. So, did you try to make sense of it? Did you journal? Did you pause? These are things that are under your control before the binge. And what I tell people is, hey, if you have paused and you have tried to feel your feelings and you have tried to make sense of them, you've tried to manage them, you've tried, like journal or go on a walk, and if you try to manage them and you still want to binge, especially in the beginning, it's okay. It's okay. Go ahead, allow yourself to eat without guilt. It's a pretty profound flip around. Okay, so I continue on by saying, so this is after what do you do differently next time. I said, one other question too for sadness. You did a great job of feeling what you were feeling. Remember these two questions. I always teach people these two questions. I've done a video on this before. I'll link to it down below. These two questions are extremely powerful. Remember these two questions. One, what am I feeling? And two, what do I need? So I told her, you got the first question perfectly. That's a great step, describing the sadness. Now we just need to get to the second question. What did you need in that moment? The sadness, that deep sadness. What did you need there? The exercise I give people a lot of the times, this is actually the next thing I said, to get some clarity into what you needed in that moment. If one of your children was feeling incredible sadness, what would you say to them? What advice would you give them? And whatever your answer is above to the question, what do you need? Here's the final question. Could you give yourself permission to give yourself what you need before you binge? This is a powerful thing. It's getting clarity on what you need. The binge is not about food. Sometimes it is about food. Sometimes it is. Sometimes you're not eating enough. That's a different case. In this case, we're working on food, but she's not in deprivation. She's not in a strong diet mentality. She even said she wasn't hungry before the binge. She knew it was from stress and overwhelm. So the feelings became too much. And what I'm asking her to do is, what did you need in that moment? And it can be a confusing question, but if we feel it in our body, if we journal about it, and then if we imagine, this is the key step. If we imagine someone else that we love and care about is feeling what we're feeling, what do we say to them? What advice do we give them? And usually people have the wisdom. They talk nicer to that person. They're respectful to that person. They say, okay, you need to take a break right now. You need to, they're able to voice the right action to the imaginary other person. And then once they voice that to the other person, they're like, oh, why don't I treat myself that way? And then so I continued and said, as strange as this may sound, our goals right now are to simply, 1, reflect and learn what we can do differently next time, and 2, out of this reflection and growth mindset, to give ourselves the love we need before we binge eat the next time the pattern occurs. If we learn and give ourselves love before we binge eat, this is success. This is our goal right now, to learn and to try meeting your emotional needs before you binge eat. That's the goal in the beginning. It's not to stop binge eating. It's to learn about your emotional needs and to try to meet them. And trying to meet them. It's like, if you try to meet them and you still binge eat, that's okay. It's a skill. Remember, it's a pattern that repeats itself. So every time the pattern repeats itself, we get more insight, we get more clarity. We figure out what works and what doesn't work. Now, and then I underlined and bolded, I'm not saying to stop binge eating. We just want to love ourselves before we binge eat. How do we love ourselves before we binge eat? We learn from our previous binge eating episode. We hypothesize some way we can meet our emotional need, like walking, calling a friend, journaling, music, etc., etc. Again, if your children were sad, how would you advise them to take care of their sadness? Then the next time the pattern repeats, we are more prepared. We see the signs coming, and we have a game plan based upon our hypothesis on how to take care of ourselves. We'll practice self-care before the binge. That's where we're at right now. Remember what you told me the other day. The only failure is not learning. So I hope that answers the question, how I work with people. This is just an email. Usually I work with people over the phone. But, people, I say if you binge or about to binge, reach out, reach out. Let's digest. We don't have to wait a few days until we talk again on the phone. Let's give you support in that moment. I hope that email makes sense. And anyways, have a good day. Peace. Oh, let me know your questions too. All right, bye.